lastly, the distaste for the Baroque that the fascists had really caused a breakdown of any preservation of Baroque monuments in Italy. And in fact, one of the things that occurred after the Second World War was a massive sort of reconstruction, represervation of these Baroque structures that had pretty much been left, ignored and left to fall into dilapidated state. And why I'm showing Michelangelo Pistoletto's Venus in Rags here is the setting. I mean, there are some phenomenal photographs of Povera works, contemporary Povera works, contemporary at the time that they were made, I should say, that are in these amazingly dilapidated settings, many of them that are essentially abandoned Baroque structures. And in fact, there's quite a rash of Italian gallery dealers in the 1950s in particular that open up galleries, independent galleries, in these old Baroque buildings. So there's almost a process of osmosis in the sense of this sort of lost, abandoned type of tradition that these artists, these Italian artists, are beginning to re-dialogue with, and very much as sort of a response or an answer against these sort of years of fascist rule. Now, in terms of artists in particular, there are some older artists that are going to be very significant for the Arte Povera that they're going to look up to in terms of their work. And one of them is the Argentinian board artist Lucio Fontana, who's actually shown seated here in this work with one of his pieces from the middle 1960s here with three art critics. And in fact, Fontana was famous for his ruptured or punctured surfaces, as well as famous slash canvases. And this is actually, and then most of them are titled Spatial Concept after the Second World War. This one, and he's based in Milan, I should say. I mean, most of his career was spent in Milan, and that's where the sphere of influence is really coming. And this work with the stones and the punctured canvas is part of what he called his Baroque series, which he created between 1954 and 1957. In fact, his famous White Manifesto, which he had students in Argentina write, talks about this element of time, movement, and space, very much in terms of reviving the sort of Baroque mentality. And if that wasn't clear, Enrico Crispolti actually writes a short monograph on. In fact, Crispolti is the individual on our far right in the photograph of Fontana, writes this Baroque career of Fontana, and that's in a few notes, a title which he will take up for Fontana's huge catalogue raisonné from 2004. So I mean, there's a very clear awareness of the Baroque. These are the dramatic photos of Fontana slicing the canvas and breaking away from that purity of the classical and producing these whole series of and that element of theatricality is obviously very important for Fontana. These wonderfully staged photographs with this rupturing, this breaking of this perfect surface in these canvases. And the other key contemporary artist, which would be an important influence for the Povera artist, is Emilio Vedova, who's a fanatic of the Baroque and created this informel style of painting that was meant to be this type of tribute to the Baroque. This is part of his Berlin Diary series, 7 works of that series from 1964. And then you have and they are huge works. As you can tell, this is Image in Time of 1958, and a nice quote from Vedova, which gives you a strong sense of what he sees with the Baroque. He says, the analogy between the reality that stirred the Baroque and our own reality, with its own different content, is rooted in a similar debate of conscience, of complex apprehensions that push people towards situations of rupture. And there's a nod here to, obviously, Fontana as well. From the classical to the romantic, or in our own times, from style to what we are now experiencing. So, I mean, he sees it as sort of, again, this wonderful cyclical, Vico-like movement that the Baroque is definitely a part of, and which he sees his age coming to the fore. Okay, well, I'm going to start with the direct borrowings in terms of Arte Povera. That's the context. This is to give you a sense of the atmosphere that they were living in, and how that concept comes to be translated to these artists. We do have moments of very direct borrowings. This is Luciano Fabro's Eye, or The Egg of 1978, which is this wonderful sort of bronze piece that's laid in a Borromini fountain in Rome. So, it makes quite clear, the legacy. Obviously it's signaling a sort of new beginning, but a beginning that's still in the waters of the Baroque. And in fact, water is going to be an important image for the Povera artists, as it was for the Baroque artists. You also have Pier Paolo Calzolari, his Untitled of 68, which he himself points out is related to the use of light, spirituality. He is one of the most spiritual of the Povera artists. Most of them tend to be rather secular in terms of the presentation of work. Calzolari is really interested in terms of a more spiritualist dimension. And in this piece, you have his dog Melina, an albino dog, attached to chained to a wall, and you have these pillars of ice, which go into this transformative theme, this metamorphic theme, which are dyed pink. And then there's this very bright, intense light that's shined on this wall, which drives the dog crazy because as an albino, you're extremely hypersensitive to light. And he phrases it in the context of the use of light in the work of people like Caravaggio and the conversion of St. Paul, where light is used to sort of symbolize this higher reality. And this, for Calzolari, I mean, he's making quite a conscious nod to that sort of Baroque tradition of spiritualism and light in his work. Another artist is Yannis Kounelis. He's a Greek-born artist, came to Italy, arrived through Naples just after, about 10 years after the Second World War. And he himself, does these wonderful live animal pieces. This is a stage design that involves both. You can see the burlap sacks, which are filled with various imported materials like coffee beans, etc., to create this amazing smell, as well as all these bird cages up against the wall, which have these tweetering canaries, which I don't know how they performed before this piece. And it's funny because Kounelis relates to the fact that when he arrived as an immigrant in Naples, the first thing that struck him was the smell of coffee beans that were being offloaded on the ship, and that remained with him. And then people had sort of mentioned to him that his devices are very surrealistic, thinking about Duchamp's famous objects using bird cages as well. But he says, no, my work is not surrealistic. In fact, it's theatrical. It is Baroque. And the quote nicely translates, again, a very direct lineage, although Kounelis is more in a sort of more heightened monumental theatrical Baroque than the more sort of subdued approach that we're going to see in some of the artists as we move along here. The last one I was showing the direct connection is Luciano Fabro, who, it should be pointed out, wrote an essay called The Era of Francis Bacon, referring to Bacon in terms of the 17th century English philosopher, in 1963. So, I mean, his connections are quite direct. And this one called The Spirit of Geometry, Spirit of Smoothness, which poor translation of the French word finesse of 1984, and why it's the French word is because it's coming from Fabro's reading of Pascal, the 17th century French philosopher, and rephrases the Greek column. The Greek column is sort of this ideal of perfect rationality and logic, with this element of doubt that Pascal was constantly working with through his sort of mathematical and philosophical speculations, which the biggest is the question of infinity, which is what fascinated me about a lot of these discussions of coro vacui, and how the Italians couldn't deal with coro vacui because, I mean, if they're going to embrace the concept of infinity, there's a contradiction with coro vacui and this notion of the infinite. And so this beautiful sort of single monument, which always reminds me of the Temple of Zeus at Olympia, because the only thing that survives of that temple is one single column that sort of stands as a sort of monument. So.